I had a case in Puerto Rico where the Navy was bombing the island of Vieques. And there are people who live there, the poorest people in the Caribbean, in Puerto Rico. The highest cancer rate because the detonation of naval ordnance had released all these chemicals like antimony, arsenic, lead, benzene, toluene, xylene, really bad stuff, and they were all poisoned. And they had no economy because they were bombing it all the time. There were much better places for them to do that bombing up on the North Carolina coast. But Puerto Rico doesn't have a congressperson, and they didn't have, and this was the poorest part of Puerto Rico, and so it's the same thing. And they ended up putting me in prison down there in maximum security prison for the whole summer of 2001. I ended up down there because I was, from litigating this case.
Wow. Well, I gotta ask. Go for it. I want to rewind back. You said there are light and dark sides to everyone. Seeing what your uncle and your father went through in politics, what's the driving force for you to also take that path?
Well, I never intended to go into politics. I toyed with it a couple of times.
What did you want to do?
Well, I liked what I was doing. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
I like working on the environment.
Right.
I'm outdoors all the time, and I had a very happy life. And I have a very happy marriage, and my wife is amazing. My wife is an actress, Cheryl Hines, who's on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yes.
And yeah.
Way to go.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I feel. And then we have 7 kids, and I have a really good life, and I do litigation. I'm suing big polluters, so I feel good about what I do. Like I have a mission.
So why take this path?
But because I've been censored now by first the Trump administration, then the Biden administration, and then I saw what was happening with the war. I see what's happening with the Democratic Party, that it's abandoned, the ideals that my father had, that my uncle had. And I felt like I was in a unique place to be able to challenge that. So, and that whatever happened, I needed to talk about it. I needed to tell people, this is not right, what's happening. Democrats don't censor people. And the Democratic Party is not the party of war. Listen, we give $113 billion to Ukraine. We topped it off in March.
Yeah.
So that same month in March, I have a buddy who's a commercial fisherman who's worked his whole life as hard as he could. He's got a lot of injuries. And the kind of business that he had, he doesn't have a pension. He had his own business. Oh, he's been on food stamps. He's getting $283 a month from SNAP. And he got a phone call, an automated phone call. And by the way, $283 doesn't go so far, for a month. It's like $9 a day.
Yeah.
And the price of food, because paying for all the wars, the price of food, is gone up 76% in 2 years. They tell you, the government says the price of food's gone up 20% in 2 years, but for good, decent, basic foods, chicken, dairy, milk, dairy, eggs, 76%. So my friend getting $283 a month and trying to live, he got a phone call, automated phone call the first day of March saying his food stamps have been cut by 90% to $23 a month. 30 million Americans got that call. 15 million Americans got their Medicaid cut that month. The same month, we top off our aid to Ukraine, $113 billion. If we weren't sending that to Ukraine, we could feed these Americans. And that same month, we print $300 billion to pay off the Silicon Valley Bank because it failed. So we have a lot of money for the people who are rich and for the military-industrial complex, but for 57% of Americans could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency, and 25% of Americans are now hungry, and we need to get our priorities straight.
Right.
And we didn't need to have that war. The Ukrainians said, we forced Ukraine into that war.
We should have just minded our business.
They not only said, yeah, if we had minded our business, they had already signed a peace treaty. They had a peace treaty called the Minsk Accords that everybody had agreed to. Zelensky got 70% of the votes saying that he was going to sign it. It left all of Ukraine intact. It just protected the ethnic Russians in Donbass. It protected them so they could speak their own language and they wouldn't be killed by the government, which we installed. We paid for that coup in 2014, put our own government in, and they started killing Russians. So they had settled it. And we went in and told him he couldn't settle it. And then in April of 2022, just after the Russians invaded, the Russians wanted to settle it. And they only sent 40,000 troops in. They wanted us to come to the table. Zelensky signs and Putin sign a peace agreement. And Putin starts withdrawing all of his troops. We send Boris Johnson over there, the former Prime Minister of England, to kill the agreement and say, we don't want to settle, we want a war with Russia. When Biden was asked, why are we doing this war? He said, regime change in Russia, that's our objective. That's not good for the Ukraine. My son went over there and fought because he's idealistic. He didn't tell me where he was going. He went over there, he joined the Special Forces unit, he was a machine gunner, was in the Kharkiv offensive, and risked his life. And now 350,000 kids have been killed from the Ukrainian side alone. And it's a war that should never have happened. That the story that we're told that that was an unprovoked invasion by Putin is not the accurate story. There's another story, and that is that the U.S. wanted this war. Lloyd Austin, the same month in April when we sabotaged it, Lloyd Austin, who's the Secretary of Defense, was asked by the press, why are we in this war? And he said, because we want to exhaust the Russian army and degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. And we don't have to kill Americans. He didn't say this, but earlier position papers had said we should draw Russia into war with a country like Afghanistan or the Ukraine, where their soldiers are going to be dying. We'll provide them the equipment and we'll exhaust them. And it's not a good outcome for Ukraine.
Right.
By the way, the same people who are engineering the Ukraine war are the same ones who engineered the Iraq war. The neocons, Victoria Nuland, the Iraq war. I don't know how old you guys are. You're 47, so you remember the Iraq war.
You cannot listen to him. You cannot listen to him. He barely remembers his battle raps. Don't listen to him.
But we were tricked into the war of Iraq. We were told there were weapons of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. We were led to believe that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, which he didn't. That he was harboring terrorists, which he wasn't. That he had weapons of mass destruction, which he didn't. We had to go in there and do a preemptive war, which America has never done before. We go in there and we get rid of Saddam Hussein. It cost us, in the end, that war led us into Syria, Yemen, Libya. Mm-hmm. The whole thing cost $8 trillion. So what do we get for $8 trillion? And that's bankrupted the middle class in this country. The way they pay for that is through inflation, which is a tax on the middle class and the poor. And what do we get for that war? Well, here's what we got. Iraq is worse off than it was under Saddam. We killed more Iraqis than he ever did. We killed between 600,000 and 1 million. Iraq today is just is an incoherent nation. It's a battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. It's not a safe place to do business or to live. We've pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran. So Iran is now controlling Iraq, which is exactly the outcome we were trying to avoid.
Right.
We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees to Europe. And, you know, the riots that are happening in France now are those refugees.
Yeah.
And Brexit, you know, is from that immigration is what drove, you know, the Brexit and broke up Europe. Oh, these are the outcomes.
It's the same way with Bin Laden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are, you know, the outcomes that we got for $8 trillion, and now we don't have a middle class left in America. And that's really where our strength comes from. Our strength comes from the middle class.
It's hot for trapper turn smack rapper. Only smack rapper that you know is smack rappers. Got bars I can hang with the backpackers. Trap star, I don't hang with the backpackers. I'm in the hood with the work you heard. Making fiends leave earth you heard. Got your baby mama thirst you heard. Feel the flow, nigga, throw it in reverse. This the wave you need to surf you heard.